Tam ste vsi ok v zadaj, ne? Ok. Hvala sem, ki ste prišli. A mi slišite ok? Zato, ker se tole snema, bom preklopil v angleščino. Upam, da je to ok? Yeah? Sure. Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Peter, for inviting me. And the Academy of Fine Arts and Design as well for hosting me. I'm super excited to be here, actually. I think this is the first time that I'm speaking in Ljubljana since I left, I think, which was like 15, 20 years ago. I think, right? So. Is this, just a quick check-in so I know who I'm speaking to, is this mostly current students? How many of you are current students? Sorry for the hands up. Oh shit, okay. Yes, so mostly current students, excellent. Okay, good. What I have prepared for you today, I have no idea what I'm walking into or what kind of lecture this will be, or, yeah, Peter said do whatever. I hope this is useful. It's a two-part lecture. It will last for around an hour. I hope that's okay. That's okay? Yeah. An hour is okay. It's a two-part lecture. I think the first part will be a historical case study that's coming out of my academic research, and the second part will be two typical studio projects as well. So that's roughly what I'm going to be talking about. Sorry. And we're back. Okay. All right. I'll start. So, my name is Žiga Testen again, and I'm a graphic designer. I think that's still a term that we use. And I wanted maybe just to clarify, because it's relevant for the lecture today, that when I say graphic, I mean visual communication, which is a term that I actually quite like still. And with that, I mean that visual communication is the language that I speak as a designer. It's almost like, I think it's the easiest way for me to explain what I do, that it's a language that I use. And with design, I mean how I do things and how I see the world and how I organize my practice and how I approach projects. And I think today's lecture will be more on the design side of things, and the workshops that I'm doing with students at the Academy will be more about the specifics of the language that I speak as a designer as well. I will start today with an overview of another graphic designer. I thought this is a good opportunity to, instead of talking about myself, which I eventually will, to talk about somebody else. It's a case study that I've done years ago about a Serbian graphic designer called Dragana Stojanovski. I think it's a nice moment to introduce him to you because he's completely absent from Yugoslavian original design history as well. But I'm also introducing him because I think his method, his approach to design has been a model for me as well, very much so. So I think that's why I'm starting with this. I'll do this really quickly. I'll do that really kind of dry case study presentation now, and I'll start with him instead of talking about myself. So, Dragan, who I want to talk about today, is Macedonian. He's born in the 1940s. He is actually trained as a painter, not as a designer, in the 1950s. He works in Belgrade, first as a theater poster or scenography maker, and is then employed by the SKC in Belgrade as a poster maker. Gets promoted to an in-house designer and kind of stays at that job for the rest of his life. SKC in Belgrade is a student cultural center. It's a bit like Škuc in Ljubljana that I'm sure you're familiar with. So it's actually an identical institution. It's one of the 4 or 5 centers like that across Yugoslavia. I will be talking about Dragan because, again, it's easier to talk about somebody else than talk about myself. And I will be talking about Dragan because I think the way he dealt with maybe the more political and engaged side of his design practice was really relevant and important for me as I was trying to form my way as a designer. Okay. So we know roughly who Dragan is, and we know that he worked for the Student Cultural Center in Belgrade. which starts in around 1971, and it's a bit, again, same as Schutz here. They organize shows, art shows, concerts, theater shows. Important to note as well, it is kind of the regime's response to 1968 student uprising as well, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay. So, also, okay, why this particular guy? Why Dragan? Why Stojanovski? How do I even find him? As I said, he didn't really quite exist before. So for this, I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm using InDesign for my presentations. So instead of a fancy PowerPoint animation, imagine this is like a film animation. We're going back in time now. And so I'm going back in time to here. Okay. So in around 2013, I'm in Belgrade for the first time, actually second time. This is a photo that Peter took of us when we were there. He was with me in Belgrade at the time. And that's Odvil, the Slovenian graphic designer who's been living in Belgrade for ages, and he was my guide there when I first went there. And I came to Belgrade to meet this guy, a guy called Slobodan Masic. I discovered his work, maybe a year before I came to Belgrade, and it was really the first time for me that I've seen, such confident use of the Swiss style, such confident deployment of Helvetica that I've ever seen in the territory at the time. It was a work that I have never seen before, and I was just really, really curious where this was coming from. I was familiar maybe with Pizzo's work and some other graphic designers from the time, but Masic was new to me. And I think at the time I'm a young graphic designer in my early mid-20s, I think, and what I'm really trying to do, I guess, find a lineage that was local, that was here, like a lineage of graphic design, a predecessor, a practice that I could relate to, that I could build my own practice on. I always envied designers from Switzerland, from Holland, that had really rich graphic design traditions, not necessarily poster making, illustration traditions. And I was trying to find some kind of a moment that I could base my practice on as well. And, Slobodan's work seemed really exciting, really fresh to me, so I go there. He's still alive, and I go there to meet him. And when I finally meet him, we organize this meeting. Borat helps me as well, and I meet him, and the work was great. I just didn't really like him very much. We didn't click. It just didn't work out. It didn't work out. We had this strange, awkward interview. I did 2 interviews with him, and I felt he was weird. He's not weird. I just felt he was weird. It really didn't work for us. And so I stayed in Belgrade for a little bit longer, and I speak to other people, I meet other people, and somebody's like, why don't you look into the work of this guy, Dragana Stojanovski? And I Google him, and there's nothing. There's zero. The name just doesn't exist on the internet. And I speak to other people to kind of try to cobble through who this guy was and what his work was. And slowly, I start putting the pieces together. Okay, he worked for the SKC, he was the in-house graphic designer. I find some work lying around. I go to the archive of the SKC as well, so we see some work. And I'm still a little bit confused. Why do they think that I should be interested in this guy? The work is messy, it's kind of unstructured, it's the opposite of Masic's work was. It's kind of just it's just photocopied work, literally. It's kind of punk before punk as well. I'm not sure what to do with this. There is a lot of work though. There's really a lot of work that we kind of discover in different archives. And the more I look at a work, the more I'm beginning to have a feeling that, okay, this work might be significant for some reason. There's a large body of work. It's speaking something to me. I just don't know what it is yet. I know today that why this work was interesting and important to me is, and I'll try to convince you about that today as well, is because I felt, this is mostly the work from late 1960s, 1970s, I felt it really it perfectly, in my mind, embodied the social context of the time, Dragan's social context of the time. It also kind of embodied and was a comment on the social contradictions of the time, and it was also kind of done consciously as well. So he kind of knew what he was doing as well. That was relevant for me as well. And it's not that Masić's work is not significant. I mean, he's an excellent graphic designer. There's a huge body of work. Are you familiar with him at all? Somebody? No. Actually, really beautiful body of work, you know, starting in the 1960s. He has his own publishing project since 1969, I think, which was called the Independent Editions of Slobodan Masić. He published, I think, over 100 titles. He also, from what I could figure out, he never really worked for anyone. He was one of the first self-employed designers. The publications that he published were always dedicated to one single artist or a writer or an architect with their name and surname always spelled out large in this kind of playful, beautifully set Helvetica bold on the cover. So these books are amazing. You can find them all over like secondhand bookstores, even on the internet. They're excellent. And again, you know, I could see how his practice visually really fits into Western graphic design histories as well. He feels a little bit like, to me, a little bit like the Yugoslavian version of Jim Crowell or somebody like that. Like, he really fits in. And I really feel like, okay, this is something I could build my work on because, you know, that kind of abstract, typographically led work is something that's really close to me as well. But as I said, his practice model, I just can't quite relate to him. He also has weird comments as well, something about us all coming from first mothers in Africa as well. I think he was just old at the time. But one thing that becomes quite interesting to me, this is Slobodan and this is Dragan. One thing that was interesting to me is that they both work in the same field. They both mostly work in the field of culture, which is where I was working at the time as well, working with museums and galleries and so on. They have similar, if not same, clients. You couldn't necessarily say that they were necessarily aligned with the regime at the time, whatever. They were not prosecuted or anything, but also they were slightly critical. They worked with artists that were critical. But their work visually was so different, and I was just curious what is going on. Like, why is it so particularly different? Why somebody is interpreting that kind of dissidence in one way and another person in another way? Okay. Is this all going okay so far? I promise this is a 20-minute introduction. Good. Okay. I'm going to do a small detour here. You guys are my age, right? Around here. But then you guys are a bit younger. I'm going to do a small detour just to give you a bit of the social context of the time as I see it as well, or as I could find out about it, because obviously I'm born in the 1980s, not 1960s or 70s, so I have no idea what things were like at the time. From what I could gather, 1970s are a particular time in Yugoslavia. Obviously the country is going through a significant social, political, but also economic reform. It already broke away from the Comintern, from the Soviet Union in 1975, but it's kind of pursuing its own, as we kind of maybe some of you know, pursuing its own third socialist communist way. So it's not Soviet, it's also not Western, there is increasing influence from the West, there is some funding from the West as well. So it's kind of sitting somewhere in between. It is socialist, communist, but it's kind of sitting somewhere in between. It's not entirely aligned with the Eastern Bloc either. And there is some political and economic experimentation happening as well. The regime is maybe a little bit less hands-on, and it's a little bit more removed from day-to-day operations. There's this economic experiment called the socialist self-management as well, which in many ways seems strangely a bit like contemporary neoliberal precarity entrepreneurship a little bit as well. So everything is a little bit self-managed and maybe left to everyone's devices. So the state is maybe slightly removing itself from intervening too much. Lots of interesting things can happen in culture because of that. Lots of interesting things can also happen in economy, politics as well. Without or with less kind of top-down oversight, though, there is a bit of an increase, from what I understand, in corruption as well. There's an increasing social stratification and so on happening, a bit like what's happening in Slovenia right now as well. This is a really nice image. I really like this image. It's a banner displayed at the 11th Congress of Yugoslavian Self-Managers, and it's this perfect, beautiful 70s corporate logo. I swear maybe Bruman designed it or somebody like that. And then there's Marx and Engels and Lenin and Tito as well. So this perfect mix of like corporatism and socialism as well. What's maybe relevant here is that in 1968, like everywhere else around Europe at the time, the student protests erupt, a bit like in Paris as well. And from what I could gather, there are kind of two different streams of those protests as well. There is a stream or a side that was more like the hippie side, but also the economy side and the liberal side, where like we just need more freedom and we want long hair and we want free enterprise and all, just generally less control over our lives. There is also the more intense, more left-leaning neo-Marxists, Maoist side at some point, a little bit like in France as well, that actually says, no, we actually need more socialism because what we're living in is actually not socialism anymore. The state is moving away. This is a weird kind of liberalization of the country and so on. So there are kind of these two streams in those protests as well. And it needs to be said that the Student Cultural Center in Belgrade, as much as Škuc, as much as other student cultural centers across Yugoslavia, were a bit of a response of the regime to some of the demands from the students as well. It was a bit like, well, you want freedom, here's this institution, and here you can grow your hair long, and you can do whatever you want, and this will be a site of free expression for you, and you can do whatever you want in there. The Student Culture Center in Belgrade, though, kind of took a slightly different route. It had some adventurous directors, Dunja Blažević in particular, who was there, who I went to meet as well when I was in Belgrade, and her programming of the institution was very adventurous and very critical as well. It was kind of almost like a proto-institutional critique in many ways. So, what I'm thinking now, and maybe it's becoming a little bit clear, is I wanted to say and maybe to show how maybe those two streams, those two kind of maybe progressive streams, were reflected potentially in Dragan's work and in Mašic's work as well. Now, as I said before, they kind of both work in culture, they both work for kind of left-leaning progressive clients. And if we put them on a typical kind of left-to-right axis politically that we often still use even to this day, we say somebody's on the left, it's more socially progressive, somebody's on the right, is more socially conservative. They're clearly both somewhere around here on the left. The work is kind of abstract, it's playful, experimental as well, and so on. Easily onto the right, we can put something like that. For example, a poster for Yugoslavian Airlines at the time. It's slightly misogynist, it's slightly stereotyping a little bit, and so on. So, you know, it's not maybe necessarily so much to the right, but for me it is. So, you know, that's why they seem, okay, you think they work for the same clients, they're here. But if we place them on a slightly more complicated grid, this is more typical, kind of like post-Second World War, post- or Cold War political axis, where we introduce not just socially radical and socially conservative, but we also introduce democratic and authoritarian. This is in particular an Ising double-axis model, which comes with its own complications, but I think is useful for this lecture. I realized that what was maybe problematic for me with Mašic is that he is essentially a Western liberal, while Stojanovski is kind of more on that side, potentially an Eastern European socialist in some way. And I think maybe that's why Mašic's work fits so well into Western graphic design history, and maybe that's why Stojanovski's work is so absent. That's why he was not even considered relevant, even for me. I couldn't really fit him in anywhere. But, okay, maybe Mašic's work is not the topic of today's conversation, but let's look at Stojanovski's work in particular. I looked at his work for a while, I made lots of interviews with lots of people, and I could extract a few key strategies that he had relating to his work process and his work that I think are relevant for us and were relevant for me as well, and I think make him something not of a Western liberal. But anyway, this is the Student Cultural Center in Belgrade, and that's the, I'm going to skip here. Okay. The first key thing, which is I think really important, and I think that really relates to my work as well, is like he proposes a work that is extremely context specific. There's an extreme contextual sensitivity. I think the work is almost like a kind of a bricolage. It's like working with what's there, a bit kind of like an architect works with a site. Like an architect comes to a site and look, where's the sun, where is this, and so on. So really sensitive to its context and the material that he's working with. This is the initial SKC identity that he didn't design. It was designed by somebody else, and I could never figure out who designed it, but we found it in an archive in Belgrade. And it is, again, it feels like a little bit like that banner that I showed before. There's this quite clear revival of a Bauhaus-like font. It's kind of this logo that could be for a textile industry or it could be for a cultural institution. And as soon as Stojanovski takes over, he cancels this immediately and just starts using a bunch of random elements. There was no identity anymore besides that font that he was using because it was just a typewriter that they were using. He cancels all of that and he starts using the name of the street that the Student Cultural Center was on, the house number, a little abstracted icon of the building, and these elements sometimes appear and sometimes they don't, but it's literally now you know what this is and now you know where it is. So it was literally something that everybody could recognize and understand and relate to straight back to the building, the physical location as well. And the work really becomes almost strangely meta as well. It was always about the Student Cultural Center and the community there as well. A poster, for example, for the International Day of the Child, a photography exhibition that took place at the SKC. The baby on the photo is Dragan's own child that was just born that year. And then first 10 years of the SKC here, a celebration of the 10 years of the Student Cultural Center. The kid here is, again, Dragan's kid, now 10 years old. He will sometimes deploy or use his friends on posters. He will often use just his equipment from the studio and so on. He also notoriously removed the doors to his studio and removed all the doors at the SKC to kind of make it more open so people were not afraid to come in and work with him. And the process that he used was that he worked really collaboratively. So people would need a poster and they would come to the office and apparently they would sit with him and they would do something together. So the idea was always that the work was done collaboratively in some way or another. Posters for group shows were often just done by photographing the artists in the group show instead of showing the artworks, or sometimes the artists were showing their artworks on a photograph. Sometimes the works became artworks as well. This was a collaboration by the artist Željko Jerman. This was a collaboration with the artist Goran Trbuljak, which was showing all the misspellings of his surname on mail that he got, for example. And also the key thing was that the posters and all this printed material that we're producing was apparently quite rarely used outside of this SKC very much to kind of advertise it. It wasn't done for an abstract target audience. It was basically done for the building, for the community there. So they were more often shown within the building than they were shown outside of the building. Another thing as well is that actually he completely removed himself as an author of this poster. That's why I couldn't Google him. That's why I couldn't actually even find him. All of these posters were signed with as the print shop of the SKC. So he just took this name and he was the print shop of the SKC. The posters were printed. He didn't even design them. So he's not even signed there. You can often find him on some of the photos from the SKC. That's him over there. And again, I think the idea was that he was part of the community and he was just one piece of the whole puzzle the SKC was. He is sometimes there, though, as himself with his body on the posters as well. This is a trope that he keeps reusing and reusing and reusing. That's him putting a poster over this kind of Baroque frame, and then he kept reusing that same, I think, screen printing stencil over and over again. The last thing I think that's important as well is that he apparently worked really, really fast. And the focus was always on ideas, never so much on a graphic or typographic refinement on the work. This is not necessarily his work, but I think it's a good indication of, I think, how things were made as well. At last moment, with the least time wasted and done as fast as possible. The idea was the important thing, the concept was the important thing. Graphic articulation, I think, always came second or last. The SKC in Belgrade has a fantastic archive. All the images are really excellent. Like, the documentation there is incredible. I mean, the documentation is horrible, but the archive is incredible. But this is absolutely the most boring image I could find in the archive. It's from a lecture series titled Conversations About Design. So I'm going to finish with Stojanovski at this point, and I hope it was maybe clear from my presentation that, I mean, what it was clear for me from looking at this, that in the 1970s, the society in Yugoslavia is changing. It's changing from a society as a collective to a society of individuals, more like the West is today. And I felt that was really reflected in both of those practices, in Dragan's as well as Slobodan's practices. I felt that Masic really embraced that change with a really strong kind of disciplined, uncompromising individual vision. He was not the collective, he was himself, he worked alone, he was an independent author. Like, he even named his publishing house after himself. And then on the other hand, we have Stojanovski that kind of countered that with this really quite messy and chaotic expression of the collective, and kind of completely removed himself as an author, but kind of made that his strength as well. And I felt that in some ways, what I find quite relatable, I felt, is that Stojanovski's work was a kind of a design compromise all the time, I felt. It was a compromise with form, it was a collaboration all the time, but at the same time I felt that the body of work still spoke really strongly about the ideas developed together with his collaborators. Okay. I'm not going to talk more about, I have more to say, but I might stop about Stojanovski for now. Everything okay so far? Am I talking too fast? Okay, thank you. So, a few key things that I really want to take away from this. I think a particular approach to collaboration, how Stojanovski worked with other people, and how he made it into his strength, working with the content and with the conditions that he found there as well, somehow. It was very local, it was very context-specific, it was very content-driven as well. I think all of those were really relevant takeaways for me as well. I'm going to talk about two of the studio projects, of my projects now as well, that I think maybe, I was thinking of his practice as I was working on this first one, not so much on this last one because it was just last year and I don't think about Stojanovski very much these days, but definitely when I was working on that one. But I feel they're both quite relatable. So two projects, I think two typical studio projects are both books. I mostly design books these days, but I always try to point out that I can also do branding and websites and other stuff, which I do, because I do this for a living. So, the first one I'll talk about is the book called Surfing the Black, Yugoslav Black Wave Cinema. It's a really old project. It's from, did I put a date in here? 2010, so it's super old. It's like 40 years old. It's almost as old as this guy's. And then the next one is just from this year. We just completed this year. So I thought it was nice to show like a really early project and a really late project. I thought it would be an interesting thing to do as well. What I think is really interesting as well, look, this one cost 22 euros back in 2010, and this one is now 140 euros. So inflation. I'll start with this one. Okay. This is essentially a student project that I've done. It's a student project, kind of like a student project that I've done during my residency at a school in Holland that started around 2008. So it is a very early project. So it's 2008 now, and I live in the Netherlands, in Maastricht, from all places, which is a tiny town in the south of Holland. And I'm playing ping pong with a guy called Gal Kieran, and this is precisely the table that we played ping pong on. This is a book I designed about the building, but has nothing to do with my lecture today. But that is the ping pong table. And Gal introduced me to these movies from the 70s that he said were called the Yugoslavian Black Wave. And I never heard of them actually until then. And we both got into them a lot, and we started organizing screenings. There was a really nice screening room at the school, at the academy where we were at the time, and eventually kind of formed a bit of a research project with some other people at the school as well, organized screenings, invited people to talk, and so on. So what was the Yugoslavian Black Wave? Literally, you can think of it as French New Wave, more or less. It's a little bit like that. It's very diverse. Each director had a particularly unique style and approach. Some are quite social realist films. Some are quite entertaining and quite free, almost like hippie movies from Karpo Godina, for example. I guess the common trait was that they were reasonably and quite critical of society at the time, so critical that film critics called them black films, or that's why it was called the Black Wave. Around the time as we started working on this, some people started rediscovering this as well. And we were organizing lectures by all kinds of people that we knew that were interested in this. We collected enough material at some point and we thought this should be a book, and then a book was published on it as well, not by us, but by somebody else. And that's totally fine, obviously. But it had this Helvetica on the cover and it just really irritated me. So I decided, and it was by one guy, it was this long dissertation, actually. Fair enough, like it was a good book to read, but not to look at. And I just felt that our book is going to be completely different. And not just by the fact that it's going to have Times New Roman on the cover and not Helvetica, but it will be different in a more structural way. And I guess what we really wanted it to be was not a really academic dissertation, but something that will kind of open up the topic. We didn't want to pretend that we knew everything about this. We just wanted to make the topic visible and open and attractive for everyone to do their own research into it. And we decided it's going to be this really sprawling, messy collective endeavor. It will include essays and interviews and all of these things. When you brainstorm a project, especially when you're young, you're like, it's going to do all of these things. And then you're like, what is it in the end? And we invited all these people and all these writers, and I invited all these designers to do something, and I didn't know what yet. So eventually, this did come together into a book. And then we had all this material. We had essays that we commissioned, and we had random interviews that we've done, and we had all these posters that asked people to do, because there was a big lack of posters that I could find in the archives as well. So I just asked designers to make new posters for these movies. So we had all this material. And then I was like, okay, we need to turn it into a book now. Well, how do we do it? And I think this was really the first time where I managed to pull off a bit like Stojanovski, just work that was really strongly based on the material and work that was really strongly based on ideas that I had about the work, and then I let the design make itself. As you will see, I'm not particularly interested in graphics. I was maybe interested in fonts, but I've been using Times New Roman for a very long time now. And I really wanted those ideas to be made very, very visible, though, through the design. And there were with this book, I had quite a few ideas. I had a few strong ideas that I wanted to make visible. One was this idea that the book is going to be edited like the films. And what was kind of unique about these films, because they were made quite quickly and quite cheaply, is that the cuts between the scenes were really rough. Like, they didn't happen at the right time. You thought that the scene is still going to go on, and then it was just a cut, and the next scene would happen in the films. And I kind of wanted to have something similar to happen in the book as well. I somehow managed to split the book into a few sections. There were essays and there were zines where I crammed everything that wasn't an essay somehow. And I made a few really kind of crude decisions that all the essays are going to be red, because red is very different from black, which will be all the other content. So again, like as much as I can, I try to deploy really quite simple and clear and legible decisions. And then what I decided to do, we kind of wanted all this content to mix together a little bit, not just to section it out totally apart. And I had this idea that, because we told the authors, can you write about, I don't know, between 2,000 and 3,000 words, and nobody did. Somebody wrote 6,000 and somebody wrote 1,000, and then nothing really fits anymore. I had this idea there's going to be sections, like 16 pages of essays and then something else, and 16 pages of, and it didn't work. But then I remember that the movies had these rough cuts, so I just ran an essay for 16 pages, and then the essay didn't finish yet, but I just cut it off. And then this other section would start on a different paper, and then I would cut it off again, and then the essay would continue from here. And obviously it's pretty mad, because it's kind of quite hard to read that way as well. And so in order to make it a little bit more legible, I then cut every second section a bit shorter, so you could just flip straight to where you left off. So you could kind of easily navigate between the sections. One thing that I learned for the first time in this project as well is that not every image is a good image. It's a terrible thing to say. But we were collecting, it was quite hard. We were getting images from archives, and sometimes you work on a publication project in particular, and you're really excited about it, and the topic seems really great, and then you get this folder from the editor full of images, not random images, but they're like, these are really important. And I'm like, yes, I can see why they're important, but they're not good images. And what I mean by good images, obviously when you are making a project, you want things to cohere together, you want them to become a thing that's more than the sum of its parts. And what was really difficult with this project is that images were coming from everywhere. There were film stills, and there were scans, and lots of the things that we got off the internet, but lots of the things that we just took snaps and so on. And it just wasn't, images weren't really working. And what I've decided to do is to only use images that were already published somewhere else. And so we gathered them all. I collected all this printed material, stuff from archives. I scanned them all in, and then I printed them out, and then I photocopied them again, and then I scanned them back in. So I got this really nice flatness to the images, and they kind of, all of a sudden, they all became to belong together somehow. Like that. And you might have noticed I said before that these sections were black, but they don't really look black. That's because my colleague Dubravka, who was one of the co-editors, in one of her essays wrote something about, like this was all really dark and black, but there were shades of black. And I was like, every time I look at the Pantone swatch book, I see all these blacks in there, and I have no idea what they look like. And also, why are all these blacks? Like, what's the difference between them? So I decided to use every single Pantone black that was there in the Pantone swatch book. They were really quite different. Some of them were really quite green, and some of them really kind of yellowish as well. So they were all kind of black, but shades of black. And then there was this messy part of this project as well that Peter was part of as well, where I asked all these designers to design posters for these films. We just couldn't find, we actually literally couldn't find film posters for these films. I knew that some existed, and they were really hard to find, and they were also not that good. And I just gathered a bunch of designers together, and I was like, could you design a film poster for this film? Because there is none, and I don't like it into a project. And we got all these like very creative posters that were not really posters at all. And then I also felt that the poster is not a poster until it's on a wall. So here is where Peter came in, and Peter photographed them being pasted on the streets over a period of time. Here is a poster by New Collectivism. Here's one by David and Joris. by polite society on the streets. Anyway, again, one of those things where I felt I can't just include a graphic in there. It needs, if it's a poster, it needs to be on the wall. It can't be in a book. And here's the final object. Now, this is a student project, so I used way too many ideas on this one. Like, I think it came together reasonably nicely, but one thing I took away from this project is like never have so many ideas. One thing that I think is interesting though, like as obscure and cryptic as these ideas might seem, you know, like, I mean, nobody will know what the rough cut was and why my sections look like that, and did I photocopy and how did I make those images look like that. Like, all these ideas might seem illegible, but I completely believe that they're always really, really legible as well. When the book won an award as one of the best Dutch book designs of the year, the jury report completely unpacked it as well. They're like, yeah, it's a book, it's perfectly attuned to the content, it's raw and rough. I really, really believe that, you know, as I said before, graphic design is a language, and everybody can actually read it. We can also write it, but everybody can read it as well. And I always really believe in that when I design, as much as abstract and as obscure as my ideas sometimes are. Okay, I have another film effect now. So this was 2010, and now we have to go like a few books onward. And here, okay. Second book that I want to talk about is this one. It's called Dale Frank, How This Art Works. Now it's 2024, or it's actually 2023. And now I live in Melbourne in Australia. Don't ask me how I ended up there. And it's a slightly different place, but I still make books, but I make them for a living now as well. So they are a commercial practice as well. But I do feel that my practice is still reasonably similar at this point. So I'm going to talk about this one. This is the lump of pages that I want to talk about that will eventually become this book. I now also work with another graphic designer called Stuart Geddes, and we mostly share all of our projects. We don't really use a studio name anymore because we're both over that at this point, and we just sign both our names. And sometimes projects come to me, sometimes to him, sometimes to both of us. This one comes to him first. It's from a gallerist called Jeff Newton, who runs a small commercial gallery in Melbourne. It's for a painter called Dale Frank, and I never heard of Dale Frank. But Stuart is excited, so I'm like, okay, this is cool. And so I Google him, and then this comes out. And it turns out that Dale is like a really successful commercial painter that, you know, most rich Australians have his paintings in their obnoxious living rooms. I mean, look at it. It's like a hotel. Absolutely terrible. Look at this. Horrific. And I see these paintings. And I'm like Stuart is still excited. He's like, but we're going to use all kinds of special inks. And it's like, it's great. Because like, technically, this is a great challenge. Because we're like, how do we even print this stuff? You know, how do we turn it into a book? But I'm looking at this. I mean, and then there's also this other book that somebody designed for him before, and it's just this like slightly dumb hardcover that I really don't like, and it totally looks decorative. It totally looks like it belongs on this coffee table here as well. I just can't deal with it. And so I'm like, Stuart, no, we can't do this. It's like, I mean, we do have a reputation. I mean, we do this for money, but also like we just can't do this. And then Stuart tells me how much money they offered. And so I'm like, oh, we're going to look into this a little bit more. It's true. Like, I mean, we make books, and it sounds like it's not, but it was a lot of money for us. And so I look into this a little bit more, and it turns out that Dale is strange. He gives paintings these really long titles. Like, this is the first thing that I noticed. For example, here's one. Alexander, 28 years old, and Andrew, 33 years old, in a relationship, purchased 69 Erskine Road, Erskine. After Alex's 8 million lottery, Andrew is free to have anonymous sex to ease his anorexia-induced insecurities and seems to enjoy being beaten up. Alex is into leather pain, large female dogs, breeds Dobermans, and the music of Iron Maiden. Both are heavy prescription drug users for recreation. It's from 22, it's epoxy and color pigment. It's quite large, they're all quite large. I'm like, that's interesting. That's, you know, worth us looking at it. And I keep Googling him, and I find this photo of him. I'm like, who is this guy? And so at this point, I'm considering it. Like, this is a maybe. Maybe this will be something. And this is at the moment where I'm like, shit, like, this material sucks, but let's try working with it. And this is a moment where we could do all kinds of special links and all those things, but how can we, is there something, he seems interesting. I feel that maybe just everybody else that worked with him didn't quite pull out the energy that he probably actually does have hidden somewhere in his rotten heart. So that there is something to him that we could really pull out somehow. So I found this photo, turns out, was from a Vogue Australia homes or interiors shoot. And there were other photos like this one of his house, it turns out. And I couldn't stop thinking of this, you know, reasonably problematic but also very seductive magazine called World of Interiors. Do you know it? It's actually, I love this, you know, I love this magazine. It's excellent. It's like Apartamento for very rich people. Not that Apartamento is not for rich people. Yeah. I actually really like them. Photography is really beautiful. I think there's something really redeeming in it for me. And I really thought of this incredible project by Marek Emil Shaimovitz that I've known for a long time. He did this project where he was painting over pages of World of Interiors. It was beautiful. There was this book from J.R. Rigier as well. And I thought of all these things, and I'm like, maybe Dale could be painting over his house or something. I don't know yet what this is. And we go to Dale, and we're like, Dale, it's going to be your house, and then it's going to be the paintings as well. But we don't yet know how. But it's going to be like this. And we totally thought that he's going to be like, what are you talking about? Like, get out of here. But he was like, he literally said, excellent, I hate it. Do it, but do it fast and make it very big before I change my mind. And so we're like, okay, we need a photographer. We need a photographer because clearly now we sold this idea that it's going to be Dale's house, clearly somehow photos of Dale's house, and then his paintings on top. Because I guess the idea from us was that it has to be a portrait of the artist, that it really needs to bring out the artist, that other stuff didn't, that those living rooms and that other book didn't. And we felt that he was actually mad in a really good way, and that we kind of wanted to bring that out. And so I'm thinking, okay, we need a photographer, and then Jeff, the gallerist, is proposing some of his artist photographers, and I'm like, no, we need 500 photos, like, I don't need one. And then I'm thinking, like, what if, like, who can shoot really fast? At the time, or for a while, we were designing a kind of like a political monthly, a bit like Medina, but a monthly thing. So I had some experience with commissioning photographers as well. And I thought for a second, one time before I used war photographers to go shoot politicians as well. I thought maybe a photographer, like something like that. And I was like, no, who can make something out of entirely nothing? Fashion photographers. And I was lucky that Jürgen Teller's old assistant was stuck in Sydney at the time because he came there to shoot during COVID, because in Sydney you could still shoot at the beginning of COVID, but then Australia locked down and everything was really fucked. But so he was stuck in Sydney and he was still there because he moved everything there. And he was still there, and we sent him this mail. We were like, then could you come shoot this artist's house? And maybe the artist, but he doesn't want to be photographed. And then we're not going to use your photos really. We're just going to put his paintings on top, and we need 500 of them. And we also thought he was going to say no, but he said, yes, that's great. And so we started organizing this shoot. Again, this is still a point where there's no design. We have designed nothing yet. We just had this idea and we're just pursuing it. And I had this idea in my head what this could be, but we don't know. And we started organizing the shoot, and Dale is being a real prima donna as well. He sent these strange emails to us. Ben sends him a mail and he's like, hey, I'm gonna come and we're gonna have a cup of tea and we're gonna shoot and it's gonna be really nice. And then Dale writes back, I don't drink tea, and I don't drink coffee, and I do not make tea or coffee for anyone. But also, I'll be gracious and entertaining, but I cannot be here to entertain you, and also, no photos will include myself in any of them. And we send Ben out, and eventually things are going a little bit strange. Ben was supposed to be there for a day, but he stays the weekend. We get no updates at all for the whole weekend. We're getting really, really worried about this. Then we get this photo of Ben and Dale, where it says, Dale said, reduce your fees if you want us to succeed. And then we get this photo of a taxidermied horse, which Dale bought from the set of Gladiator from Russell Crowe, when Russell Crowe was having a divorce. And then late at night, we got this photo of Ben naked on a taxidermied rhino. And we're very worried at this point. And then the next week, photos start coming in, and there's hundreds of them. There's Polaroids, and there's digis, and there's film photos, and they're for some reason Dale has this insane botanical garden with this really strange looking cacti as well. All of this starts coming in, and they're perfect. And we're like, this is the book. All we have to do, that's there. All we have to do is literally do what we said at the beginning. We're just going to take these photos and then put the artworks on top, and that's going to be the book. And it ends up looking a little bit like this, and then matching the pages together, ends up looking like this. Dale eventually agreed to be photographed as well, mostly from the back. He also makes these really strange movies that he wanted included on a DVD, but we said nobody has a DVD player anymore. So there's these barcodes in it. That's what the book is at the end. I feel this is a really dumb book. It's a very Australian book as well. But I feel the method, and when I compare it to my first book, I think it's still very, very, very similar. Again, I think the key here, again, was, first of all, taking everything that was there and just trying to desperately pull something out of it, especially in this case. But also, as much as it doesn't look like it, again, working really collaboratively, get the right people into the project, onboard them into the idea, onto the concept, and then just let it run. Even when I commission photographers, for example, or other things, the idea is always even Peter. It is I don't know what this is, Peter, just here's some posters, can you shoot them? But the idea is always that you explain the idea a little bit and then you let the things run. And one thing that we do really quite extensively now, as Peter said, we're included from the start of the project. Literally, it's this book didn't exist. There was no idea about this book before we got brought on. What we usually bring in is a really strong idea. Now just one per book. I used to have 4 or 5 per book, now just one. A really, really strong idea, and then onboard everybody onto it, so everybody subscribe to it, and then everybody plays along. Everybody's trying to make this to succeed, and usually that really leads to the best possible outcomes that we had. And as you've seen as well, I literally never ever really care so much about any other graphic, any color. I'm also really bad with colors. I can only do red and black. Fonts, anything like that. It's always literally just bringing this work together, but shaping it into something that will be more than just the sum of its parts. And usually that's where something quite magical usually happens on a project as well. Okay, so it's 2024. And I'm in Slovenia. And it's the first time that I'm trying to make sense out of my work of the last few years and combining that with some additional research work that I've been doing over the years. I really hope that this made some sense. I hope this was not less work than you expected me to show. I really tried, as I said, I tried to really focus on the method, but also the kind of maybe more ideological premises that I focus on as I work. And of course, for those of you that are interested, there will be the more applied visual language, typographic language workshop that I am, of course, inviting you all to join if you already haven't signed up. That starts on Monday, where I prepared some more concrete and focused lectures, especially on typography. And what I'm focused on with beta students, which I'm really excited some of you are here today as well, is image making, which I think literally is the typography of today as well. Nobody cares about fonts anymore, but I think images are really what carries most meaning now. I hope to see you all over the next few weeks, and I'll be super happy to answer any of your questions going forward. It's so hot in here that I need to run out of here. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions now, next 3 weeks, next year.
When you were making this book for the day,
yeah.
How did you choose which artworks would go over which images?
Yes, it's a really good question.
How did you?
I have 2 screens, 2 monitors, and I had thumbnails of Ben's photos on half of one screen, and then the other ones on the other half, and then I had my InDesign here. And one thing that I now always do is like, I have to try them. So I kind of knew what the works were, I knew some of the photos, but one thing you always have to do when you're placing images, when you're working with images, you have to try them in the layout because they look different. So on every single page I would try a painting, and then I had some ideas for the photo in the back, and I tried them all, and then maybe change the artwork on top. It's a very scientific process. But the idea is that with images, you don't know, like you can see an image in your file, but it will look different in layout, and it will look different in context. So you literally just kind of, you have a sense what will work, and then you need to try it as well. Like it's always becomes a different thing in layout. It always becomes a different thing in context as well. So you actually don't know. One thing, like clients will always be like, can you use a different image? Can you use this image? I'm like, you need to see first. I'm going to waste time on this. I'm just going to jump on a call with you, and we're going to place it in together so you see what it does in layout, and then you'll see that it doesn't work, for example. So like, yeah, I think you just really need to see what it does in there. Good question. But also, like, I mean, I was tired. It was 500 pages. Like, some of them I didn't care. I hated the painting.
How long did it take to produce that whole book?
This one?
Yeah.
Really not very long. Like, I mean, most of our books are in production for about 3 to 6 months. Like, I mean, the design and concept process is something like that. But out of that, I think the actual design time is maybe 5-6 days, 4 days. Because it really doesn't take long to make it, but it's like just all the in-between steps and content delivery, and then like when you make a book, you make dummies and you test papers and you solve technical problems. But yeah, I think design time, maybe 5-6 full days of actually designing. Yeah, not much. We work really fast. I'm really proud of our InDesign files. My InDesign files now look way better than they used to. Yes. Oh.
Hi. How many projects do you normally work at the same time? Like, I know you teach, and you take some time to teach, and how many projects, other projects you work?
It's the same as you guys. Like, I mean, we usually always have like 10-15 projects on the go, but 5 of them are hibernating, and then 5 of them are waiting for content, and we've done a bit of work on them before, and then 4 of them we're actually working on, but there's like 10-15 always on the go. It's like that, no, mostly. And you want to have that many, right? So you get paid every month or every 2 months the project is completed. If you only have 1 on the go, you don't get paid for a year. But yeah, like I said, design time is so short, especially on books. Like design time is, I don't know, like first first concept, second concept, then execution. What? I said something that's making me really. No. Yeah, lots at any given time. Yeah, always.
How did you get the funding for the first book?
Very good question, because the second one, the Gallery Sendale paid for, and the publisher partially as well. The first one, we were very lucky that the school we were in at the time was really excited about interdisciplinary projects. And Gal was in interior department, and I was in a design department, and then Dubravka was an architect in the design department as well. And we said we wanted money for the project. And they were like, this is great, this is an interdisciplinary project, we want those, and they gave us some money. It was not much money, that's why we printed, I think, like 237 copies. We literally printed as many as we could possibly squeeze into the budget, that's why it was such a strange number. But yes, that's how the funding came for that one.
I have a question. For the first part of the
lecture. Yeah.
Did you meet Dragan?
He died in 2006, and I never got to meet him.
Before you met him. Okay.
Yeah.
Then maybe you can answer to the basic question I had, maybe not. Is, do you know maybe how he saw himself as a designer?
He saw himself as a conceptual artist.
And do you think that that's also the reason that he kind of deleted himself as a designer and to be just a part of the group?
Yeah, I think so.
He
saw himself as part of the movement. He saw himself as part of the institution. He saw himself as part of that whole collective, and I think that was enough for him. And I think that's a really interesting. And I think that gave him a lot of agency, though. At the same time, see, he wasn't an art designer fighting against a stupid editor and curator and something. He was the institution as well, and I think that gave him a lot of power and agency. Nobody told him what to do as well. So I think that actually there was strength in that as well. Like he was equal like everybody else. So it wasn't that client-designer relationship as well. I think that was really clever on his part, actually.
I remember one project that you did for Schutz Gallery that reminded me of one of his, that we were all on the cover. Do you remember? It was a little book.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know if I was also, or we were just like standings.
Yeah, it was for a group show by, I think, like Danish artists, and I just needed people who were the same age as them.
Okay. But it was inspired by his work?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that the last question, I think? Okay, it's a bit of a sauna in here. So, thank you so much again for coming. This is such a great turnout. I'm so happy. If you have any questions for me later, you can come to me later as well. I know it's hard to ask questions of everyone, and you can also mail me, and I'll see most of you guys over the next few weeks. Thanks, everyone.